Hello and welcome to video lecture 3C, Moral Issues in Organizational Ethics. You should recall this slide from lecture 3B. It is the moral decision-making method we introduced for dealing with moral issues in organizational leadership. In this lecture we will move on to discuss how this method and many other ethics factors should be translated into organizational leadership ethical concerns. In order to do this, we must first talk about three key terms that will be central to our discussion. These terms are profitability, shareholders, and customers. Now, there's no controversy about the general meanings of these terms. They are standard concepts in any business discussions. But herein lies the rub. While many organizational leaders work within for-profit businesses, many do not. So how are we to understand these terms when discussing NPOs? Well, let's look at them one at a time. The best way to think about profitability from a business standpoint is that it is the maximizing of shareholder wealth in the long run. So the emphasis on profitability as a measure of business success is not looking at the bottom line of a quarterly report. All kinds of variables, fluctuations, and other influences beyond the business's control can cause quarterly dips within the strongest and fastest growing companies. No, profitability is about patterns and trends that show revenues and profit margins ascending over the long haul. So how do we think about profitability for an organization that isn't producing bottom lines at all? Well, I think there are two good ways to think about profit in a nonprofit organization. Depending on the particular situation, one of these may apply more clearly than the other. In a for-profit business, profitability is important because it keeps the company healthy and growing, and because it keeps investors interested and active in their support. So also with nonprofits. A nonprofit is profitable, so to speak, when it is healthy and growing, and when it is fulfilling the vision and goals of its organization. Supporters of nonprofits are, of course, not seeking an increase in wealth. They contribute because they believe in the organization and in its vision and goals. So, just as profitability in business keeps the investors interested and active, so profitability in this sense will keep the supporters of nonprofits interested and active, which means they'll keep being supporters. As we've seen, shareholders are those who invest in and receive dividends from a business. Likewise, the shareholders of a nonprofit are their investors. These may be the legal owners or partners of the organization, but more often it is the supporters, those who contribute not because they expect dividends, but because they believe in that which the organization is trying to accomplish. In either case, the shareholders of a nonprofit organization are, to put it bluntly, the money people. And anytime there are money people, whether investors or supporters, it is a top priority of an organization to keep the money people happy. In business, customers are either the consumers of products or the clients who receive services. Now, even though nonprofits do not sell them in the business sense, they do typically offer products or services as well, and they offer them in order to meet specific needs within the relevant community. So a nonprofit's customers are those who are in need of or benefit from the products and services of the organization. They are the people or organizations the nonprofit serves. So, whether the organization is for-profit or non-profit, shareholders provide capital to the organization to enable it to serve its customers. If the organization does this in a way that keeps it healthy and growing, fulfilling its visions and goals, then the organization is being profitable. Of course, there are many important implications and connotations that these three terms have in business that do not apply at all to nonprofits. However, since this organizational leadership program trains leaders on both sides of the profit-nonprofit line, we will concentrate on the many things that all organizations share in common. Therefore, we will continue to use these familiar and useful terms, and I will leave it up to you to make any distinctions necessary to adjust our lessons to the appropriate organizational category. Hey, you can do that. You're grad students. Just do me a favor, okay? When you graduate, be sure to button your hood and keep it straight. It's an academic hood, not a drape. Okay, pet peeve break is over. Now, another concept and term that we will borrow from business, this time from the world of business ethics itself, is corporate social responsibility. Now, the word corporate is, of course, the adjective form of the word corporation, which is a certain kind of business. However, the term corporate social responsibility is so common and ubiquitous, not just in business ethics, but in all professional ethics, that the word corporate has become a synonym for the adjective organizational. And it has 3 fewer syllables, so it's much easier to say. So we will stick with this term as well. Now, the concept of corporate social responsibility, or CSR for short, was born in another related concept, that of corporate citizenship. Corporate citizenship begins with the realization that all organizations function as citizens within the communities they inhabit. Organizations can own property. Many of them pay taxes. Most important, organizations make contributions to their community and receive benefits from that community. All of these are marks of a citizen. Because citizens reside within the community that is an important part of their lives, it's also understood that these citizens have certain responsibilities to that community. These responsibilities include obeying laws and ordinances, performing some forms of civic duty, and interacting with others in a civil, respectful manner without unnecessarily causing trouble or discord. In short, citizens have the responsibility of practicing what Jan Garrett called non-parasitism in our list of moral principles. They benefit from the community and are therefore obligated to give back to that community, contributing to what the preamble of the U.S. Constitution calls the general welfare. Well, since human citizens have these general welfare responsibilities, it stands to reason that corporate citizens will have them as well. The collection of responsibilities that come with corporate citizenship is what we are referring to as corporate social responsibility. So, what kinds of corporate responsibilities are there? Well, the first one may surprise you. Organizations have a moral responsibility to be profitable. After all, profitability is promise keeping. Businesses take money from their shareholders with the promise that they will do their best to turn that money into more money for the investors. For a business not to do its best to create return on investment for its shareholders is to break that promise and the moral responsibility of honesty. Likewise, any organization has taken money from supporters on the understanding that the money will be used to keep the organization healthy and growing so that it may fulfill its vision and mission. Whenever money is freely accepted to accomplish a certain task, the party accepting the money is under obligation to use the money to accomplish that task. But corporations have other kinds of moral responsibilities other than profitability. After all, any organization of any size at all will affect the lives of others with its decisions, actions, and programs. Anytime our actions affect other lives, we run the risk of violating the primary goods of those people, especially the primary good of autonomy. Which brings us to the real heart of corporate social responsibility. Organizations have moral responsibilities toward their stakeholders. As you will recall, a stakeholder is anyone who stands to be affected by the actions of an organization. This possibility of influence creates an obligation by the organization not to influence those lives in illegitimate ways. This brings us to an important debate in CSR studies. Exactly what social responsibilities does a business have? The two major sides of this debate are the shareholder view and the stakeholder view. The shareholder view used to be the predominant understanding of CSR. In fact, before World War II, it was actually against the law for organizations to use their revenues to accomplish anything not directly profit related. This view was promoted and popularized in the last half of the 20th century by the Nobel Prize winning economist Milton Friedman. Friedman argued that an organization's corporate responsibility was owed only to its shareholders. Fulfilling the promise of profitability is an organization's only moral concern. Now, to be fair, Friedman spoke of profitability within the law. Organizations are obligated to practice full compliance toward laws and regulations governing their operations and industry. But any actions that are legal are perfectly legitimate for organizations to perform if they are directed at profitability. The shareholder view has been challenged in recent decades by the stakeholder view. In this view, an organization has a moral obligation to all stakeholders. This view reflects the notion of corporate citizenship we just discussed. After all, human citizens cannot pick and choose those to whom they are responsible. If my actions affect a person, I am responsible for that effect and morally obligated to take advantage of it. This view does not overlook shareholder responsibility. After all, shareholders are stakeholders. It's just that they aren't the only stakeholders, as implied by the shareholder view. So, the basic idea of the stakeholder view is that an organization's action is morally acceptable only if its effects on stakeholders as a whole is morally preferable to all other alternatives. In this class, we will assume the stakeholder view, which is the predominant view in professional ethics today. Therefore, it's important for us to understand more clearly just who an organization's stakeholders are. Before listing them, we need to note an important distinction. Business and professional ethicists often distinguish between direct stakeholders and indirect stakeholders. Direct stakeholders are those who have a direct and visible role in the organization's operations. These include shareholders, members of management and their families, other employees and their families, clients and customers, vendors, etc. Direct stakeholders will typically be affected much more directly than others by the actions of the organization. Indirect stakeholders include all stakeholders who are not direct stakeholders, and I'll bet you saw that coming. These include the local community, the wider community, up to and including the global community, competitors, regulators, associations such as unions, trade organizations, and professional organizations, the media, etc. Now, you may be surprised that some of these are included, such as competitors and the media, but I will leave it to you as another, hey, I'm a grad student assignment to see if you can discern how these are indeed stakeholders. Just don't forget about that buttoning your hood thing. Now, the direct-indirect stakeholder distinction is important because it helps a great deal in negotiating stakeholder interests while trying to solve a moral dilemma within organizational leadership. After all, just like with moral principles, there is no hierarchy of stakeholders. Theoretically, the needs of any given stakeholder can override those of others given the details of the situation. However, we can and should adopt an important priority rule that will save some of the deliberation otherwise required. The priority of direct stakeholders rule says, all things being equal, the interests of direct stakeholders takes precedence over the interests of indirect stakeholders. This makes sense, of course, because of their proximity to the actions of the organizations. The interest of direct stakeholders will typically be greater than those of indirect stakeholders. However, notice the magic phrase here, all things being equal. This, like other priority rules and all moral principles, is prima facie. It can possibly be overridden in certain circumstances. The general rule regarding prima facie rules and principles is that you follow them unless you have compelling reason not to do so. In other words, follow them all things being equal.
Now, as promised in Mini Lecture 2B, we are going to expand our list of moral principles with a few organization-specific moral principles. These are principles that apply to situations that are likely to arise in an organizational context. We've already talked about the first one several times in this lecture, and that is profitability. All things being equal, organizations should act in such a way as to promote profitability, however it is defined for that particular organization. And when profitability conflicts with other moral principles, profitability does not always win, as in the shareholder model of CSR, but it doesn't always lose either. Second is protection of customer vulnerability and privacy. There are many ways in which organizations can take advantage of those they serve if they want to. This is especially important in marketing, where opportunities for manipulation and deception abound. Such practices are textbook cases of the violation of the primary goods. Information is withheld or misrepresented, leading to a customer making a choice she would not otherwise have made, and thereby violating her autonomy and threatening her well-being. Furthermore, organizations are often privy to confidential information about their customers. It may be personal and financial information, or, in the case of many people-helping organizations, knowledge of private and potentially embarrassing or damaging facts about their lives. Allowing such information to be known to others without the voluntary consent of our customers is a blatant violation of autonomy. So, protecting customers from vulnerable situations and abuse of private information is a very important moral principle for organizational leaders. Vulnerability and privacy are also concerns when dealing with the employees of an organization. Employee vulnerability is grounded in the fact that the employer-employee relationship is one of power and submission. Managers have the power to benefit or damage an employee's place in the company, employment itself, advancement, reputation, etc. Using this power recklessly is a breach of managerial responsibility and a violation of employee autonomy. This potential abuse of power extends to the power to misuse private information on the employees, which organizations must of necessity have access to. Respect for diversity in the workplace is a principle that reflects many of the most prevalent and important organizational ethics issues today. Respect, of course, involves official policies and practices that recognize the rights of marginalized peoples for access to the workplace, opportunities for responsibility and promotion, and protection against abuse. Respect also includes active promotion of policies and practices that will encourage diversity and equal treatment in the workplace. Finally, respect includes active awareness of potential opportunities for prejudice and discrimination against marginalized populations. Another major contemporary concern is sustainability. As we will soon see, this is especially a concern in many international settings. Sustainability is not just a new, sexy word for environmentalism. Sustainability, as defined by the World Commission of Environment and Development, which created the concept under the auspices of the United Nations, is the capacity to meet the needs of the present generation without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. In other words, sustainability is enacting moral responsibility to future generations as well as the present one. We learn to conduct business in such a way that we are not robbing future generations of the same opportunities we have. We extend non-injury, harm prevention, and beneficence not only spatially, but temporally as well. The next organization-specific moral principle is legal responsibility. Remember that Milton Friedman defined the shareholder view of corporate social responsibility as profitability within the law. We rejected this as our concept of CSR and adopted the broader stakeholder view. However, Friedman was correct that within the law is a restriction on profitability. Any attempt to promote profit that violates laws or government regulations is morally wrong. No other questions asked. Then, accountability. Businesses and other organizations are accountable to their shareholders and other stakeholders for the decisions they make and the actions they take. This is because their decisions and actions so very often affect lives significantly and run the risk of infringing on one or more of the primary goods. There are many ways in which organizations are legally required to be accountable. Publication of annual reports, quarterly financial reports, and other types of official documentation, for example. But there are many less formal ways that a conscientious organization can stay accountable to its stakeholders. They can publish company organs that keep the company in touch with the stakeholders on a regular basis. They can issue progress reports on various projects, etc. Our next organization-specific moral principle is transparency. Now, this one has a lot in common with accountability. However, accountability has an active connotation. It's about the company stepping up and saying, here's the proof that we are doing what we are supposed to be doing. Transparency, on the other hand, may have a little more of a passive connotation. It is about stakeholders being able to find out whatever they need to know about the company with no unnecessary resistance. At any rate, these are two sides of the same coin, which is all about organizations being upfront and honest about how they are living up to the legitimate expectations of different stakeholders. And finally, there is community service. This is implied by one or two of the organization-specific principles we've already discussed. However, this helps make clear and unambiguous the fact of corporate citizenship. As citizens of the community, the organization has a moral obligation to contribute to that community in positive ways in order to balance out the benefits it receives as a citizen. And just like our original set of moral principles, this list is open-ended. There are certainly more to be added. In fact, we will add principles as our examination of global ethical problems begins next week. In the meantime, it is important to note that the characteristics of moral principles discussed in Lecture 2b are applicable here as well. As we've just said, this list is open-ended. We can and will add to it. Furthermore, these principles are only prima facie. They apply all things being equal, but it is possible for them to be overridden when conflicting with other principles. Which is the third thing to remember. These principles can conflict with each other or with other moral principles from our original list in Lecture 2b, or with principles yet to be defined. And finally, there is no hierarchy of principles. For any two principles A and B, A can override B in certain circumstances, while B can override A in others. Nonetheless, these principles, together with those from Lecture 2b, are the foundation of a very effective and powerful decision-making procedure that can enable you to face moral dilemmas as an organizational leader and choose the path that promises the greater respect and service to the stakeholders' concerns.